Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here today. My sincere thanks to Anurag and his team and Business World for making this an extraordinary event in Pune. Our book, which you can see on the screen out here, is Tata's Leadership Experiment. And this is a book about talent. And this morning, we were talking about the IAS. This book focuses on the IAS equivalent of the Tata Group. But before I actually talk about the TAS or talent in the Tata Group, I think it's important for us to understand what is it about the leadership within the Tata ecosystem that requires us to even talk about the special cadre called the Tata Administrative Service. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to go back in time. I would like you to go back to 1857. And those of you who know your history, you would know that in 1857, India was in the midst of its first war of independence. There were clashes happening in Lucknow, in Agra, and other parts, Kanpur, and other parts of North India. There were some troubles around Maharashtra as well. And here a young man of 18 years of age called Jamshedji Tata is just about graduating from Elphinstone College in Mumbai. And he's a very curious young man. He reads what's happening in North India. He understands that what's happening is not good. But he's struck by one fact. He's struck by the fact that this war of independence is happening because there is a company called the East India Company, which is actually having its own militia, which is capturing resources like they belong to them, which is trampling over the rights of people and actually making profits head over foot. And it seems to this young man, it seems like an outrageous way to do business. And it registers somewhere with him. So when this young man, who is Jamshedji Tata, when he sets out to take over his father's business, there's something that he decides there and then. And this is something which we as leaders need to keep in mind. If there is a change we have to make in anything that we don't like, it's up to us. It doesn't require any external motivation or force or anybody to push you into some situation. If you want to make a change, ladies and gentlemen, it is up to each one of us. So Jamshedji Tata decided that, look, I do not like what the East India Company did. It's a tragedy that the first war of independence was lost by the nationalists. But he decided there and then that if I have to run an organization, I will not run it like this. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the start of how the Tata values began to emerge. The young Jamshedji Tata, he committed that if he were ever to run an enterprise, it would not be exploitative. Fast forward to about 20 years later, Jamshedji Tata now wants to set up a textile mill in Nagpur. He goes to Manchester and Liverpool and other countries to look at the mills there. And again, he's horrified. He finds little kids, barely 6 or 7 years of age, holding the spindles, and these are noisy machines. Those of you who've been to some of these old spinning mills will know how terribly noisy these are. Little kids, their fingers already snapped at the top because of the fast-moving equipment, holding these machines underneath and allowing the cotton, which was imported from India as raw material, to be woven into cloth and sent back. He again had a moment when he felt that something was not right here. Little children being exploited, men and women being put in the most dark and dreary conditions that you could imagine on the factory floor. And this, again, transformed Jamshedji Tata. And he said to himself, if I were to create a textile mill in the next few years, it is going to be a complete antithesis to what I'm seeing here in Liverpool and Manchester. And that's exactly what he did. He created the Empress Mills in Nagpur. He created the Swadeshi Mills a few years later, and these mills were so far ahead of their times in terms of ergonomics, in terms of lighting, in terms of the care they took for their employees, that it was, a lot of people said, Mr. Tata, you're out of your mind. Aap kya kar rahe hain? What are you doing? This is not how you run business. This is not how you make money. And when Robin was speaking, I thought to myself, I said, here was a Tata leader, a man, an owner of his own business, who really understood that if I have to make money, it doesn't have to be exploitative. And that became the nucleus of what we call the Tata value system. So why am I spending time on this? Our book talks about this a little more briefly, but the fact is that you cannot talk about the Tata administrative service or the importance given to the choice of leaders who will come into the Tata group unless you understand how important these values are for the running of this enterprise, which today is almost 155 years of age. So move on now, let's move on to J.R.D. Tata's time. He was the chairman, the longest serving chairman of the Tata Group. And he also upheld these values, and not only that, he went a step further. He said, look, I don't have too many sons. The Parsis are not fortunate to have too many sons and daughters who can run the business, even though we are a family business. So let us look for people. And by the way, this is also done in Japan. A lot of these 600-year-old companies in Japan actually adopt a lot of people who they find competent. They bring them into the family. They make them family. And that's how these businesses have a longevity, which you don't normally find in other parts of the world. And we were talking about the longevity of family-run businesses a little while ago, and you can see that this is something that is essential to give them longevity. Bring people in who have the right values, who have the right ability and the effectiveness to run the enterprise. So J.R.D. Tata did just that. He said, look, we need good people. We cannot run, we're scaling up, we cannot run a large enterprise. And by J.R.D. Tata's time, he had moved into a number of other businesses. Chemicals and hotels were already there. Tata Steel was running, and there were a whole host of new businesses. The airlines business had started, and a whole host of new things were coming up. And J.R.D. Tata knew that I need good talent, but this talent has to be the kind which shares our value system. And he tried his first experiment. He created what he said is going to be the Superior Staff Selection Committee, which is going to identify the right kind of people. Now, the term superior staff might seem a little odd in this day and age, but what he was really saying is these are people who will have the leadership qualities and the value system that we all find very, very essential. Unfortunately, this system did not run for very long because the superior staff selection process, it floundered because the people whom they selected were not trained enough in the Tata way, and within a few months or years, they left and it all came to naught. But Mr. J.R.D. Tata says that I learned some valuable lessons from all this. I learned that you have to get people into the organization and they have to be groomed, they have to be inducted. And that, ladies and gentlemen, became the process by which Tata executives from then onwards were inducted into the various Tata companies. He made sure that they would be given a thorough grounding in the culture, the processes, the systems of the enterprise, so that they would get a true feel of what the business is all about. But then a few years later, after they had learned the lessons of the earlier mistake, they finally established what they called would be the Tata Administrative Service. And the first person they selected through a rigorous 3-day process of selection was Freddie Mehta. And then, of course, it became relatively easy because by that time the process had been perfected and everything went on beautifully. Now, the Tata Administrative Service has been around since 1956, when the first TS officer was chosen. And it is going strong to this day. And our book mentions that the creation of a cadre of leaders who have the right kind of value orientation, but who are fundamentally risk takers and who will think like the family, who will think like the owners of the business, is critical for the success because of large enterprises that are diversified and which might have multiple, kinds of businesses. So it's essential in our view, and the authors of this book, myself and two others, we all believe that the creation of a conscious leadership development process is critical for the success of companies as they get into more and more disruptive phases and uncertainty. And I was listening to Robin when he said that companies make blunders willfully or otherwise. I think the key idea about having a cadre that is trained to be committed to values is that you do not ever, or not ever, but you will at least reduce the possibility of willfully making errors of judgment. So that's a large part of what our book covers, but a third part of our book is about the competencies of future leaders, and there's one point I'm going to leave with you. Very often, companies, especially in India, we have a Companies Act which talks about CSR. Section 135 lists a bunch of activities that companies ought to take and spend money on, and there's a size and scale condition basis which you keep aside some money and spend it on activities to help society. But we believe that that is a very, very myopic approach. And the Tata Group, from the very beginning, even before the CSR aspect was introduced into the Company Act, did talk about serving the community, serving all stakeholders. We believe that that is a model which every single company must follow, because you cannot create surpluses and think you can, by giving a little money back to society, you're covering up for all the damage you might do. So companies have to start thinking through the processes that they use to actually create value in the first place. Are we wrecking the environment in doing so? Are we being unethical? Are we trying to do something wrong? Are we harming the ability of downstream communities to live well? And if the answer to these questions are that yes, our activities as a business are bringing about adverse conditions for the others, something needs to change. Because many companies, even today, seem to think that they can do what they wish. It'll be business as usual as far as they're concerned, and then they put aside 2% of their gross profits and say, I'm going to spend this, but that is not going to bring back the damage that's been done. So there's a great need, ladies and gentlemen, for us to look at the future of leadership, and I think the creation of sustainable long-term value is going to be a fundamental part of that, and we in our book address that along with the 10 competencies that TS officers must have, plus there are 2 more which we think are going to be critical as we go into the future. One of them is a unity with life mindset. We cannot run our businesses and hope that life will take care of itself. We cannot harm aspects of life itself and presume that everything is going to be hunky-dory. It doesn't work like that. Businesses are a part of the larger firmament of life itself, and they cannot be, they cannot harm what's happening in the world. That's one. And the second is, we have to emphasize the creation of long-term sustainable value rather than simply looking at our factories as the boundary within which value is being created. So with that, I'll stop here and request Ruhail to join me now. But thank you very much for your attention.